I'm Joan Plank. I'm with the Oregon State Capitol Foundation. Thanks for coming to our speaker's presentation today, sponsored by the State Capitol Foundation, and but all the work gets done by Legislative Administration and Visitor Services, and we really appreciate their work helping us. It's a great partnership that we have with them. I have the honor of presenting the 34th Governor of Oregon, Barbara Roberts. She served from 1991 through 1995 and was the first woman governor in Oregon, which we're very, very proud of. Before she was elected governor, she served as majority leader in the House of Representatives and 2 terms as Secretary of the Senate. She had other jobs too, county commission, metro.
Secretary of State.
Secretary of State is a big one. Yeah, anyway, so she's been, there's a lot of service from our governor. She's a published author and will be signing her book, Up the Capitol Steps, after today's talk at the Capitol store. There's light refreshments and coffee available. And so, Governor, take it away.
Thank you,
Looking
Joan.
forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm pleased you're all here, and I'm going to try to stay on time. They've given me a time frame. And by staying on time, script, that helps. So, when someone mentions they have published their autobiography, there is a sense that this is all about ego. And there certainly may be a dose of reality in that reaction. However, for me, there was a much bigger motivator. My belief in the importance of capturing and preserving history. I have learned over the years that history is meant not to sit on a shelf collecting dust, but to study, to think about, to talk about, and to preserve. Oregon, for example, has a unique collection of first-hand accounts of one of America's most significant historical migrations, the movement west on the Oregon Trail. That amazing 6-month trek, long and difficult, was captured in hundreds of diaries written almost entirely by the women and teenage girls of those wagon trains. They recorded the challenges, the births, the deaths, the challenging and changing landscapes, the hardships, and the hopes. They preserved that history in first-hand accounts for all the generations that followed. I never look at those diaries housed at Oregon Historical Society without feeling the experience of my great-great-grandparents, James and Almeda Boggs, who with their 3 children came west on the trail in 1853. They buried a daughter beside the trail. I have walked on the land they farmed near Roseburg. I have stood before their double headstone in the Pioneer Cemetery in Winston. History does not sit on a dusty shelf when it becomes family. So let me describe the historical awakening that led me to write my autobiography. It started about 14 years ago when I was encouraged to donate my personal papers to the library at Portland State University. As I prepared my papers, I sorted through literally thousands of items, photographs, speeches, letters, keepsakes, mementos, and I divided them into labeled boxes. I sorted and sorted and sorted. I began to think of them as the boxes of my life: family, school board, legislative member, Secretary of State, governor, higher ed faculty. And then finally, the assembled boxes, 47 large cardboard containers, went away. I breathed a sigh of relief. My papers would be in good hands. My garage and attic were definitely not archival settings. Now, what felt like years of clutter and collection had suddenly become a preserved piece of history. But it was also that year-long sorting project that, rather than freeing me, would envelop me deeply in the past for another 5 years. From sorter of the past, I would soon become writer and recorder of the past. as I undertook writing my autobiography, a book that would include my 4 years as Oregon's governor. So with my understanding that this would be both a personal and an historical accounting, I undertook the huge writing project that only a few elected women in our country had completed. In fact, at the time I began writing my autobiography, Governor Madeline Kunin of Vermont was the only female governor in the nation to have put her life story on paper. Her book, Living a Political Life, was published in 1994. A decade later, no other woman governor had published her history and shared what it was like to campaign for and then serve in her state's highest office. As one of America's first 10 women governors, I was becoming concerned that our place in history would essentially go unrecorded, told perhaps by others, but not by the women who politically pioneered those positions. 4 of America's first 10 women governors, elected in their own right, are already deceased. This history is literally slipping through our fingers. It needs to be told. What takes a little girl from dolls and tea sets to the office of governor? I began to feel an obligation to tell my story, to share a piece of the puzzle that helps complete the picture of America's early women governors, and so I began writing. I started with the idea that this book could be a cinch. After all, I was there for every day of my life. All I had to do was put it on paper. Well, surprise. After more than 5 years, I recognized I had been traveling an emotional road, unpacking the boxes of my life. I'd become part storyteller and part self-therapist. This project felt absolutely endless as the months and the years passed, writing, rewriting, research, fact-checking, chapter titles, editing. I hate that part. But it was worth the work, and it was worth the struggle. So I am pleased to be able to share with you some segments from the book that I hope will give you a feel for my story, for the personal and political journey from small-town girl to governor of Oregon. So let me begin. I'm going to show you this book. Do not do this to a book. It is a very bad thing to do. So I'm going to start with a piece that will share a glimpse into my childhood and my teen years. So let me find that chapter in this messy book. Okay, and I'm going to get a drink. This is all organized here. Thank you. This is chapter 2 in the book, and it's called Small Town Girl. Few acts of chance have more influence on our lives than the family we are born into. I was one lucky little girl. I was born in Corvallis, Oregon on the first day of winter, December 21st, 1936, and so you don't have to calculate, I'm 80. I was born into a household filled with love and kindness and respect. My mother was a farmer's daughter from Montana. My father was a preacher's son from Oregon. They met in an Oregon logging camp where my dad, Bob, worked in the mill and my mother, Carmen, cooked for the work crew. They married in 1935 and were married for 55 years until my father's death. Whatever there is about me that is solid comes from that home and that upbringing. My father gave up lumber mill work at the end of the 1930s and became a skilled machinist. In 1940, our family of 4 moved to Los Angeles, California. Just before my 5th birthday, our world changed dramatically with the bombing of America's naval fleet at Pearl Harbor and the entry of the U.S. into World War II. Uncles and cousins went to war. My dad's plant was converted into wartime production. When World War II ended in 1945, my parents decided that Los Angeles might not be the best location to raise 2 little girls. They thought we'd be safer and more sheltered in some small Oregon town. They wanted my sister and me to experience the sense of community that comes from small town living. So from the city of Los Angeles, burgeoning in post-war growth, we were suddenly living next to a small country highway with the Yamhill River bordering our backyard, 4 miles from the closest small town, and attending a one-room school without indoor plumbing. I had come from this huge Los Angeles school and almost literally stepped back into another century. Yet I've always been grateful for that experience. I learned to read and to study while other activities were happening all around me. And I learned how long I could hold my breath in an outhouse. When I was in the 5th grade, my family moved to Sheridan in Yamhill County. Sheridan was a fun, secure, safe, happy place to grow up, a little rural town of less than 2,000 people. In the summer, I picked strawberries and green beans to earn extra money for my school clothes. I would put the next fall's wardrobe on layaway and then work like the dickens to pay off the items before the summer crop harvest season ended. Yet summer wasn't all work. My girlfriends and I owned bicycles, and several of us often packed a lunch, tied a towel to the handlebars, and rode out to a swimming place in a wonderful, sparkling little country stream. On a hot day, that cooling stream was totally inviting. The added attractions were the local farm boys who showed up after their chores were done to cool off in that very same swimming spot. Those bike rides were always presented as biking and swimming excursions and an opportunity to earn our Girls Athletic Association letters. We would never have confessed that these bike rides were also turned into a great opportunity to practice our flirting skills. The truth be known, I never learned to swim. However, one summer, I did learn to kiss underwater. It all sounds idyllic, and in many ways it was. However, there was little encouragement for girls to step forward, to lead, to question in the 1950s. High school girls did not become student body presidents. We were the secretaries of student bodies all over America. And just try and imagine this today. I was a student body officer, class salutatorian, speech competition winner, cheerleader, editor of the school newspaper, all this and more. And no one ever suggested I go to college. It was the 1950s, and in small-town blue-collar USA, most girls married, had children, and disappeared into the kitchens of America. And nobody blinked, nobody questioned, not even those bright, motivated, energetic young women, not even them. I still have close friends from my high school years. We spend time together. They know me, small town girl, strawberry picker, cheerleader, student leader, governor. We grew up together, and as kids in the 1950s, the chance that any one of us would grow up to be governor would have been absolutely laughable. We grew up together, but now they tell me they aren't surprised I became governor. Well, they may not be surprised. I'm still shocked. Today, more than 60 years after graduating from high school, I can pick up the phone and call all of my classmates. It is not about cheerleading or becoming governor. It's about our shared experience as small-town kids in the 1950s. We still dance the same way. We remember the lyrics to the same songs that accompanied our growing up years. We learned to dance and kiss and drive in the same town in the same years. We shared secrets and we shared our lives. Who the heck cares about being a cheerleader 60 years ago? Not me. I care about still knowing friends who knew me way back when. I care about our shared history. So that's a little look at my growing up period. And now I'm going to share the only piece I'm going to read to you from today that you might think of as political. If I can find it in this mess. I know it's marked with a green marker. There it is. I found it. Wow, what a mess. So, this is an antidote, a political antidote from the 1990 campaign that I was running for governor. And, oh, I got the wrong thing after all. Never mind, time out. I'm going to read the same chapter. I just got the wrong page. Oh, it's a green tag, not a green thing. Okay, there it is. So let me set the tone for this story. It is September of 1990. My husband, Senator Frank Roberts, was in the hospital following an accident in his motorized wheelchair and a hip replacement surgery that followed. I am Oregon Secretary of State at this point, and the Democratic nominee for governor is, and I'm the Democratic nominee for governor. My Republican opponent was the very popular Attorney General Dave Frohnmeyer. There were two other candidates in the fall race, a libertarian and an independent. Part of the reason I'm sharing this, it's partly a political story, but it also demonstrates that one's personal and public life can come into challenging conflict. So let me take you back to 1990. A few days before I headed to Eugene for the first fall debate, Frank was transferred to a different hospital to receive some new medical therapy for his hip. Recovery was not going well, and he was experiencing far more pain than was normal this long after surgery. I was growing more and more concerned. The afternoon before the debate, I headed to the hospital to again check on Frank. I was planning to drive the 2 hours to Eugene late that afternoon and stay overnight. When I reached the hospital, Frank was looking tired and haggard. He could not get comfortable in his hospital bed and hadn't eaten his breakfast or his lunch. I was used to dealing with his pain, but that afternoon his eyes reflected a more severe pain. I knew the look. I consulted with the nursing staff and insisted that the doctor examine Frank that very evening. I said I would call back the first thing the next morning. At 7:30 a.m., I called the hospital to get the doctor's report and to speak to Frank. Frank was no longer in the hospital. He had left by ambulance very early that morning to transfer back to his regular hospital in preparation for a second surgery on his hip. They would be operating at 11:30 just before the scheduled debate. The ball joint on the hip replacement had slipped out of place and created a puncture wound that had finally pierced Frank's tissue and skin from the inside out. The reason for his pain was clearly visible by the time his surgeon examined him. Frank had refused to let them contact me in Eugene about his pending surgery. I felt overcome with guilt. I called the second hospital and reached the surgical ward. Frank was already under heavy sedation. I would just have to go ahead with the debate, call the hospital as soon as I finished, and then drive directly back to be with him when he got out of recovery. This is definitely not the frame of mind one needs to face a tough campaign debate. I wanted to cry like a baby. I did. I wanted to be at Frank's side. But I pulled myself together, focused on my debate materials, and waited to go downstairs to the hotel dining room for the first big debate in my race for governor. This would have been a tough moment under the best of circumstances. This, however, was not the best of times. At the debate, for a highly pressured hour, we exchanged jabs and answers on land use, abortion, the death penalty, taxes, timber, and even the debate schedule. Finally, the last question was posed by radio reporter Bob Valdez, a question that the Eugene Register-Guard described as the most telling question and answer of the entire debate. Here is the question. If you were not running for this office, who among the other candidates on the stage here today would you vote for? And none is not an answer. Well, the four of us had been rotating our order on all previous questions, and on this amazing question, I would be the final responder. Both Mobley and Arthur, the two independent candidates, ignored the reporter's instructions and said they would cast their vote for themselves. When Dave, the Attorney General, when his turn came, I, of course, expected better of him. Unfortunately, I was disappointed. Dave indicated that he was the only candidate on the stage prepared to be Oregon's governor, and he would have to vote for himself. Now it was my turn. I felt obligated to follow the instructions the radio announcer had laid out, and I said, unlike the three men on this stage, I will answer the question we were all asked. If I were not in this race, I would vote for the only other person on this platform qualified to be the governor of Oregon. I would cast my vote for Dave Frohnmeyer. The crowd applauded loudly and approvingly. The Oregonians said that the three male candidates had ducked the question. The Eugene Register-Guard said I had delivered the perfect answer, exactly what Frohnmeyer should have said about Roberts. The Eugene paper declared me the winner of the first debate. Their headline, Round 1 for Roberts. As worried as I had been about Frank's surgery, I never imagined I would be able to do well in that debate. However, I just steeled myself, faced what I could not change, and did my job. That evening, I watched the rerun of the Eugene debate with Frank in his Portland hospital room. My speech professor husband gave me a very good grade. Dave Frohnmeyer and I laughed over that incident a number of times over the next 20 years. I thought of it and smiled when I attended Dave's memorial. Now, let me get a drink here quickly. How are we doing? We're on time. Thank you for keeping me on time, because if somebody in the room goes to sleep, I'm going to have to stop and wake them up. So, okay. Now, I'm going to do a very unusual chapter, and I will tell you why it is unusual. This is a chapter that we cannot find in all of our research has ever been written by another political leader with this subject matter. So it is unique in that sense. It is about my state police security units, who are called a dignitary protection unit. And this is the chapter I wrote about them, and we literally cannot find anybody has ever done this before. I use names for which they have never forgiven me, by the way. Okay. This chapter is called Good Guys with Guns. Many governors who have constant security protection find it stifling and intrusive. I made up my mind that I would avoid this frustration. I would do my job, and they would do theirs. I would never think of them as in my way. For me, that turned out to be a wise decision. I was rewarded with mutual respect, friendship, enlightening war stories, and hundreds of hours of great conversations as we drove throughout the state. Very soon, I felt privileged to have their protection plus their companionship. However, you cannot spend 4 years in close connection with any group without collecting some stories worth telling, and my dignitary protection guys were no exception to that rule. First of all, quite realistically, with only one woman in my protection unit, Most of the time, I was accompanied by only male officers. For years, I had been active in women's rights work, so my officers sat through events for the Oregon Women's Political Caucus, the League of Women Voters, and Planned Parenthood. Often, they were the only men in the room. It was a little difficult to blend in. I also had years of involvement in the disability community and would sometimes be recognized in public by someone from that community. The first few times an excited disabled citizen came running toward me, arms flailing, voice shrieking, their awkward gait making them appear out of control, my officers were immediately on guard. But as time passed, my security crew grew accustomed to my diverse assortment of fans. There is a number of stories in this chapter, but I wanted to tell you this one because this is the one they wished I didn't use their name. This unrecorded incident took place between my November 1990 election and my swearing in January of 1991. I was Christmas shopping with my mother at a mall in Portland and was looking for a gift that was on my daughter-in-law's Christmas list. Mother and I ended up at Victoria's Secret, accompanied by two of my security officers. The two male officers were trying to look invisible as they moved along the walls of the lingerie store. Focused on shopping, I walked behind a rack of bathrobes, and since I'm barely 5'2.5" tall, I was suddenly out of view of the officers. When the officers could not make a visual, they became concerned. They had lost the new governor. In the quiet but fast-paced confusion, Officer Greg Lockwood backed into a metal rack of bras, spilling them across the floor. Hearing the huge noise, I stepped out from the bathrobe rack to see what had happened. Spotting me and knowing I was safe, Officer Lockwood uprighted the rack and began retrieving a rainbow of bras off the floor, rehanging them on the rack. His bright red face fit in perfectly with the colorful bras. We never let Greg forget the day he lost the governor in Victoria's Secret. But for me, the state police chapter wouldn't be complete without sharing one special memory about my security team and my husband, Senator Frank Roberts. After Frank's death and his cremation in October of 1993, I decided not to inter his ashes until his birthday in December. Once that decision was made, I felt sad that Frank's beautiful urn and his ashes were stored in the dark mausoleum vault in Portland. I decided to bring Frank home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. My state police waited outside while I did business at the mausoleum. As I walked out of the door of the funeral home, I was carrying Frank's urn wrapped in a black velvet bag. The urn and the ashes were quite heavy, and Officer Darrell Burning jumped forward to help. He gently took the urn from me, set it carefully in the back seat, reached up and grabbed the seat belt, locked it securely, and then sweetly patted the urn and said, "There, Senator, everything looks comfortable. So much for tough guys with guns." But this final story represents a special place these officers held in my life for 4 years. They made a tough job easier. They made me feel safe in some very threatening situations. They felt like family. They had my back. Now, one final chapter. This is short, and I have to use some bad language.
So the children should leave
leave the room?
Yeah, the children should leave the room. No, I corrected a couple of the other ones, but you know, you get to write what you get to write. So, oh, one more break. How are we doing out there? Everybody okay? Good. It's fun to look around the room and see lobbyists and former lobbyists that I've known for over 50 years, to see reporters and press people that I've known for almost that long, long-term friends, and I'm happy to see the group. Pacific University, right? Good. Thank you for being here. So now, final chapter, and then we'll have time for some questions. After my term as governor, I accepted a position in Boston at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. During my time at Harvard, I walked hundreds of miles, absent having a car back east. I used the trains to travel up and down the eastern seaboard for business and pleasure. I definitely knew America's East Coast in far more detail than when I arrived in early 1995. I could name all the buildings in Harvard Yard. I knew the train schedule to New York City, Washington, D.C., and Rutgers University in New Jersey. But I also knew when every United Airlines flight left Logan Airport in Boston and took off for Portland, Oregon. I always wanted to go home. So, finally, after 4 years plus, I was going home. I was leaving Harvard as the director of the Kennedy School state and local executive programs. Just before my final week's work at the Kennedy School, the school threw a very special late afternoon retirement party in my honor. Several speakers extolled my contributions to the school and my dedication to the JFK mission. As the going-away reception drew toward a close, the final speaker made his comments. Those remarks would give me a story worth retelling for years after I returned to Oregon. The speaker, a faculty member I had worked closely with for all 4 years, made reference to my return to Oregon, a pronunciation I had corrected with him over and over. For one last time, I corrected the Harvard professor. Oregon is pronounced Oregon, I said. He stopped, he looked at me, and he seriously responded, Are you sure about that? Finally, after 4 years, my frustration came out. Yes, I'm sure. My family came on the Oregon Trail. I was born in the state and I served as governor. I'm pretty damn sure. Well, the audience took great pleasure in what they thought was a joke between us. However, at home in Oregon, my fellow Oregonians loved the story. After years of hearing radio announcers, television newscasters, and visiting speakers mispronounce our state's name, I knew at that moment it was indeed time to go home. I had visited historic sites on the East Coast and felt the thrill of standing where George Washington, Paul Revere, Benjamin Franklin, and Betsy Ross had once stood. Now I would fly home to Oregon and marvel at the views of Mount Hood and the Columbia River that had greeted Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea. I had traveled the continent in a journey of discovery, much as my ancestors had done so long ago as they traveled the Oregon Trail. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would be happy to answer questions. We've got about 15 minutes or so.
I'll help with the hearing and the questions, all right?
Yeah, we're going to try to repeat things for people who are watching this streaming, and they can't always hear the audience questions. So, yes. I'm sorry.
What book are you signing is what she's...
Oh, I'm going to sign this book, Up the Capitol Steps, the autobiography, yes. And I do have two other books on death and grieving that are first and second edition of a book on death and grieving. So, but this is the one we'll sign.
And the book's available in the gift shop, and the governor will be headed that way when she's done with questions.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, Governor. I know that from reading your book and from your history and being governor during a significant budget crisis, you have experience getting through that. Right now we're in a similarly challenging place. What's your advice to the legislature?
So the question is advice to the legislature about budget issues.
Well, as you know, if you've read the book and you said you had, that I became governor. The night I was elected governor, Measure 5 passed. So that was a dramatic impact on local schools, community colleges, local government, and mostly the state budget. So we were cutting millions and millions and millions of dollars out of my first state budget and all the state budgets after that. My advice is to remain strong and courageous, because there's nothing easy about making cuts to programs that have great advocates and care about those programs. It's always difficult, and there's never enough to go around. Measure 5 still impacts our state budget. The second thing, while being courageous and strong, is to be compassionate, to remember that these are not programs, these are people. And you have to keep that in mind every day, every time you touch a budget. Every time you make a decision to spend, you also have to say, can we spend this if it means cutting this? So I think, the strength and the ability to be strong and do the hard thing, that's what you get elected to do. It's part of the job. The compassion is a bonus. It comes with people who care and think about others. And I think those are the two strongest pieces. And I would say that I am grateful not to be sitting on the House Revenue Committee anymore.
Other questions?
Yes.
Thank you for sharing your story. What advice or words of wisdom do you have for women who would like to run for office?
The question is, what advice do you have for women who are interested in running for office? Advice or wisdom?
Oh, I hope I have some. Well, first of all, I encourage women to run. We have more women serving in the legislature than we've had in many years right now. In Multnomah County, we have a 5-member county commission with all 5 women on it, but 3 women of color on that in that 5. We have a woman Speaker of the House, a woman governor, a woman attorney general. The list goes on and on. But women bring something to the table often that is a different kind of experience than men bring to the table. It's just the truth of how our culture, at least currently, operates. I tell young women who want to run, before you run, or maybe old women who want to run even, before you run, there's some things you can do that will make you stronger. The new Oregon Blue Book is in the gift shop, in the Capitol gift shop right now. It just came out, and it shows you, I think of this as the Oregon Bible. It tells you everything you want to know about Oregon, every elected official, every county, every city, every radio station, every newspaper, the history of Oregon, and all the agencies of state government. If you've spend any time with that book, you will be more prepared to run for office. That's the first thing I would say. Secondly, if you've never taken a speech class, I would recommend do it. People say, oh, I can't speak in public. Well, part of the job of being an elected person, an elected woman also, is to be able to speak in public, to make your case on issues, to be able to stand up strongly for the things you think are important or oppose the things you disagree with. And you will give speeches on the floor of the legislature, before the county commission, the school board, whatever that office is. And it's important people can hear you and understand you. Speech is not something just to make you uncomfortable because you don't like to speak in public. Speech is something to communicate with others, and so I would recommend that. And the third thing I would recommend is to work on someone else's campaign first. Work on a legislative race, work on a school board race, a community college board race. Pick a race, and I don't tell people to start with the president's race because you're so far removed from the candidates there. The higher the office, the more removed you are. You don't get to see your candidate very often. If you're working on a school board race or a city council race or a county commission race, you see your candidate all the time because they're probably wherever you're working. So I recommend that you get that firsthand experience about it, what it looks like, what it feels like, and to understand the process of a political campaign. And then one final thing I would say to you: if you have low ethical standards, please don't run. What else? Yes.
Governor, this is more of a comment than a question. And just touching on what you just said, I'd like to acknowledge you. You just spoke about ballot measure 5 having passed, and I remember that you said people will die. And that was not a threat. That was what you saw was so. And I think for people it was a disconnect to hear an elected official not attempting to sugarcoat, not attempting to threaten, but to say what was actually said and what people needed to be informed of. Thank you. And throughout your 4 years, you continued to demonstrate, telling people like it was, not sugarcoating and not. You, in your term as governor, you were a demonstration of an elected official, of a citizen, being in office and standing over and over again for what was possible. And working for you was, it's been the greatest privilege of my life that I got to see a fellow citizen rise to the occasion of serving. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work so well right now out of our political system. And if I turn this into a question, the question is, Governor, can you see that at some point we can get back to more of that nationally, not just here in Oregon, where we're, I think, fortunate to have some very talented officials?
So the Speaker was thanking the governor for her service and her honesty and all that she has done, and is asked if there is anything that can help us get back to a more sane, my word, not yours, discourse, I guess. Does that work for you?
It does.
Okay.
I think I can do that. First of all, thank you for your kind remarks. I really appreciate that. Sometimes it's difficult to be as frank and honest as I tend to be, but I think citizens deserve that. They need to hear the truth, even when they don't like to hear it. But I would say that as difficult as this time feels, the budget crisis here in the state, the disruption and unpleasantness at the federal level, something else has changed. And that is, I have never seen so many active citizens in every part of this country and in every part of this state as I am seeing right now. They're helping candidates. They're standing up on issues. They're telling what they like. They're telling what they don't like. The Capitol right now, you walk these halls and it's filled with citizens. The ACLU is here today and they're all wearing their ACLU buttons. People are down here telling the legislature how they feel about legislation that's here. Some will be for it and some will be against it. But that kind of citizen participation is public, and I mean is important for public discourse. And I would say one other thing, because there are a number of people in the room, and if you've not read the book or don't know me for a long time, you may not know I was one of those citizens who walked up the Capitol steps as a mom with a handicapped child. Way back in 1971. I was poor, unsophisticated, didn't know the legislative process, but I came because my son had been sent home from school and told he could never come back again because of his disability. And I came in this building inexperienced but determined as hell that my child was going to have an education. And 6 months later, and I was just lobbying one day a week, I talked to every member of the House and every member of the Senate and testified in both houses. At the end of that time, Oregon had the first law in the nation that allowed children with emotional disabilities, my son's autistic, with emotional disabilities to go to public school. It was the first state in the nation. I had literally changed history. Sometimes you think one person can't make a difference, and obviously they can, and we've seen it over and over and over. So don't believe you can't make a difference, and don't believe citizen participation is not a huge element in good government, better government. And I'm so thankful that Oregon's system is as open as it is, that a citizen can walk up those Capitol steps and talk to people and say, my son needs to go to school, and it works. So,
All right, I think we're about ready to wrap. Thank
Okay.
you. Governor, you taught me something. You made me laugh. You made me cry. I think it was a successful day.
thank you.